Well, hey, it's Matt Steen, co-founder of Chemistry Staffing, here with another chemistry conversation. Today, I'm pretty excited. We're going to talk to Jeff McCord. So Jeff is a co-founder of Your Enneagram Coach, and it's he and his wife, Beth, started this. And prior to that, he spent about 20 years in churches as a pastor, as a church leader, had just kind of a pretty diverse career, and now currently resides in the Nashville area with his wife Beth and two adult kids. So Jeff, thanks for taking some time to talk.
Oh, Matt, it's great to be here and particularly addressing this topic. I'm just thankful that it may be something helpful for pastors and for churches as the Enneagram continues to grow. And what do we do with this thing? It's great to give some information about it.
Yeah. So excited to be able to share some of that. So let's start off. Let's do a little bit more general question, and then we can dive into some of the Enneagram stuff here
Sure.
afterwards. But you may have noticed, maybe, that it's been a bit of a crazy season for churches and church leaders.
Sure.
I've heard rumors of this.
Yes.
What trends are you seeing right now in the church and in your work with pastors that we should be aware of?
Yeah, my heart breaks, to be quite honest with you. So I stepped away from the pastorate in June of 2019 and could not imagine the difficulties that leaders in local churches are facing with all the different dynamics that are happening that came at us in 2020. Travis Brayberry wrote in his book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, and the paradigm is personal management and relational management. And how I see things transpiring is it is difficult for ministry leaders to hold all the different interpretations and of what's happening and how to address them, but also to take care of themselves. And so that anxiety, that angst is showing up in very peculiar, odd ways. Pastors moving when they weren't thinking about moving, pastors stepping down. And a lot of this is that all the strategies to take care of themselves and to lead have been disrupted, and they don't know what to do now. And that leaves them in a difficult spot. And if they're not in a safe place, if everybody's anxious and going after each other, then it's not safe enough to be curious about how to move forward.
That's so true. I mean, so much of what we're seeing right now is just the sheer number of people that are seriously looking. I mean, the 3 weeks leading up to Christmas, right?
Yeah.
Typically, there's something going on around that time of year, so people are typically
Sure.
busy. But the number of
Sure.
lead pastors that were putting resumes in, instead of preparing for their Christmas sermon or something like that, was just astounding to us. I mean,
Yeah.
probably 3 or 4 times what we would see in a typical December. And that just for us kind of signifies that there's a significant changing of the deck coming
Sure.
up, because I think it's just what you're saying, just people just.
And the reality is that pastors are carrying with them their own unhealthiness. And so we typically think, the next bride is going to be the better one, the best one. And the problem is that they're having the same trouble. And we as pastors have our own unhealthiness and blind spots. And so the reality is that we're going to repeat the same role. A difference in move, although sometimes legitimate, doesn't solve the fundamental problem.
So say I'm a pastor that's in this season of looking to transition. Maybe you do a good bit of work with the Enneagram, and you spend time with people, and
Sure.
Enneagram is a great tool to get a better sense of who we are as individuals and kind of understand our wirings. But if there was somebody that was talking to you about potentially transitioning in this season from their current church to another church, is there something that you might share with them based on their type, or is there a common warning that you would give people of certain types in this season?
Yeah, the way that Jesus talked about spirituality and his people is it all starts in the heart. The heart of the problem is the problem of our hearts. And so out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so our focus with the Enneagram is primarily on the core motivations. Now,
Mhm.
you can geek out and talk about wings and triads and
Mhm.
tri-types and all these different things, but at its core, even James 4, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from the desires that wage war in your heart?
Yeah.
And so focusing on the core motivations is the utmost important thing, because those four core motivations are the way in which we interpret our experience.
Yeah.
And that's how we are processing all that's happening around us. And it's what we're striving for. So the one is core fear, what we're moving away from;
Mhm.
core desire, what we're running towards;
Yeah.
core weakness, an unhealthy attribute we bring to all of our relationships. And the last is a core longing, a message that our heart longs to hear. And we are trying to work out those motivations through relationships with bodies of believers or leadership teams. We can, the Proverbs describe it as that the fear of man is a snare. It ends up trapping us, and we've repeated a role that leads us down an unhealthy path.
Mm. So there might be something to having enough of an understanding of our wirings that we can kind of say, okay, press the brakes and say, hey, what's going on here? What am I
That's
really
right.
running from or running to? Or
And the Enneagram, one, we've noticed a couple of things that it's immediately practical for people in relationship. Is that one, the Enneagram is going to help you to give vocabulary to what you're experiencing. And then number two, when other people recognize someone's Enneagram number or style, there's immediate empathy and compassion.
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that you wrestled with it that way. And I know this to be true in my marriage. So I'm a type 6,
Mhm.
and I bring my sixness. We joke around, it's also sickness, and sometimes sixiness, but I bring all of it to my relationships.
Right.
And my wife recognizes that when that happens, something's happening in my heart that I may not be aware of.
Mm.
And I can use that as an opportunity, invitation from my father to pray like David prayed: search me and know me, and lead
Yeah.
me in a way everlasting.
Mm. So for somebody who may not necessarily be familiar or maybe just kind of have a cursory familiarity with the Enneagram, how do they kind of take some of what's out there, what's available about this and really begin to apply it to their lives? I mean, I'm sure the first thing you're going to say is go to your enneagramcoach.com and buy everything, or at least three of everything. Which I'll do the
That's right.
plug for you so you don't have to be that guy. But I mean, what is it? Where do you start, and how do you start to incorporate some of this into your daily rhythms and interactions with the team?
That's right. Well, as I said before, there's a lot of ways and approaches to the Enneagram. And we at Your Enneagram Coach, our goal is for people to break free from self condemnation, fear, and shame in order to come alive to the truth of the gospel for their lives. And so the goal is not just simply self awareness, but it's restored relationship with God, others, ourselves, and our work. And so we have a couple of free things that I think would be really, really helpful for people.
Mhm.
One is, if you go to yourenneagramcoach.com/core motivations,
Mhm.
we've got a free download that gives a summary of the core motivations for each type.
Mm.
That's going to start to give people language and vocabulary to describe what they're experiencing. And then there's a couple of ways in which to develop that further to understand how you personally function. And
Mm.
we've got 9 journals. You can buy those on Amazon. They're called the Enneagram Collection. And then we also have a coaching course called Exploring You, which is my wife's pre recorded coaching sessions that she does with her clients.
Mm.
Now, if you're looking at something relationally, we also have a very unique tool that um, and it's called Becoming Us. Now, if you go to becomingus.com, that's the title of our book on marriage.
Yeah.
It's called a personalized marriage plan. And basically, you can get a free download that gives you insight into the healthiness and unhealthiness of every arrangement of the Enneagram.
Right.
So for my wife, who's a type 9 and I'm a type 6, it's going to walk through how we can stumble over one another as it
Mhm.
relates to spirituality, conflict,
Mm,
communication, family of origin, and becoming our best selves together. So
mm.
those are just two immediate resources that
Yeah,
would be free and easy to dive into to be
yeah,
able to find your type and understand what's happening in your relationships.
that's really cool. That's really cool. So as as a pastor begins to embrace this and say, hey, this is a helpful tool for me, how do you best work that out in your day-to-day leadership of your church? I mean, are there best practices that you can use to kind of help figure out how to interact with, the youth pastor who's a seven, and kind of
Sure.
figure out how not to take a hostage with the two of you?
Yeah, that it's very interesting. We strongly encourage people to not use the Enneagram as a sword or a shield. So the Enneagram is not intended to be used to defend our behavior, to justify our behavior, and nor is it to be used as as a sword, that is to attack people, pigeonhole, put them in a box,
Mhm.
um, or to stereotype.
Mm,
Uh, and so, one, I think, and the way that we phrase it is from Galatians 2 with Paul talking with Peter about he's no longer in line with the truth of the gospel.
mhm.
And so, one, I think reflective exercises that help you to understand, is your heart in alignment with the truth of the gospel or not?
Mhm,
And these are the descriptions of, what are the fleshly behaviors versus the fruit of the spirit.
mhm,
What's going on inside of me? The Enneagram is going to help to name some of that for you.
mm,
And by reflecting on where you're at in the morning versus wake up, check your email, check social media, get in the shower, buzz off to work, take some time before the Lord to figure out where your heart's at.
mm.
And as it relates to working with people, um, we use a term called a suicide. It's where we make wrongful assumptions that harm
Yeah,
relationships.
yeah.
And just because someone identifies as, let's say, a type 2,
Mhm,
that doesn't mean that we should presume to know what they're dealing with. They may have different vocabulary, different experiences. And then, if you use the metaphor of like a Sherwin-Williams, if you go to look for blue, there's
mhm.
not just 5 blues, there's
Right,
thousands of blues, right?
right,
And
right.
so when working with others, two things to remember. One, be curious.
Mm,
Hey, I saw this happen, or I saw you say this. Help me understand more of where
mhm,
that came from.
mhm.
Or number two, simply reflecting back to them what's happening. Hey, when you said that, that landed on me in an odd way,
Yeah.
but I'm curious as to what you intended by it.
Mm,
That way, instead of saying, oh, you're a 2, and that was unhealthy of you to do that, that's accusatory and presumptuous,
yeah,
you're actually inviting conversation and connection with one another.
that's cool. That's cool. And this might show some of my baggage being somebody who works with church search teams, to help them find candidates. So if I'm hearing you say this right, it might not be the best practice of a church to disqualify somebody for roles based on an Enneagram number or anything like that. Is that what you're telling me?
Oh, well, absolutely. The Enneagram measures some things, but it doesn't measure all things.
Yeah.
And we wrongly assume that if you're a certain type,
Mhm,
then you fit in certain roles. And
mhm.
that's not actually accurate. There are situations, I mean, type 7s who are notorious about avoiding pain in their life. You would think that's the
Stop it.
last person you would want to be at your bedside when you're dying.
Right.
But healthy sevens are the best people to bring hope into dark situations.
Yeah.
You might think of a type 5, the investigative thinker, and they're can be a little reclusive, avoidant of people,
Mhm.
more research heavy. That why would you want them as a senior pastor who needs to be highly relational? Well, the reality is that we know type 5s who bring a degree of depth
Yeah.
and understanding and wisdom, and they invite people into that world, but they just do it in a very calm but assertive way.
Yeah.
And so we really limit, those stereotypes actually inhibit the real opportunity we have to be curious about people and how God
Hmm.
has designed them when we use it in stereotypical ways.
Hmm. So how would you, if you were to talk to a search team, and basically I'm asking you this so that I can steal everything that you tell me, if you're going to talk to a search team, and they say, well, we want to know what their Enneagram is, how would you advise them to use it? How should that, should that affect the way that they ask questions of somebody, or how would you advise them to use that information?
That's right. So, one, there's it's a number of great assessments out there. So, one, just having someone take the assessment and ask them if they would be willing to share the results,
Mhm.
but don't tell them that they have to share the
Mm,
results.
mm,
And because they're going to get on the pastoral side, you're going to get fearful because I may be a 6, but I want you to think of me as me,
right,
not in terms of what the Enneagram says about me.
right.
But number two, ask them questions like, well, as a type 6,
Mhm.
what are things that you value in the organization that's a reflection of your sixness?
Mm, mm,
What what are some blind spots or some unhealthy attributes that you found yourself that you find in your leadership?
yeah.
And when you're best as a 6, tell us what's that like? How could we as fellow leaders in the church create a setting that would help you to thrive as a type 6 leading our church?
Yeah. That's strong. That's good. Kind of figure out if how they process through this, and even asking them how they staff around some of those traditional blind spots, I'm guessing too, right?
That's right. And even to say, because it's a common reality that there are some types that just get under our skin. And so, you have them, like sometimes can, if you know enough about the Enneagram, say, these are the kinds of types that, not that I don't like them, but I find I have trouble with.
Hmm.
And we can be very honest about it because I mean, that's one of the gifts of the Enneagram is that it normalizes certain behaviors. It's like a
Mm,
non-judgmental friend.
mm,
And we can be honest and be curious about one another as it relates to our type.
yeah. So this is a question that I didn't prepare you for, and so part of this is me just kind of going chasing shiny objects. But are there potential pairings that we should realize are going to bump up against each other a little bit more?
Yeah, the ordinary way that we get that question is, "I'm married to a type. Did I make a mistake?" Or "Why did God give me a child of this type?" That's another way of phrasing the question. Um, it's interesting. So we have in for our Becoming Us book, we've created 45 marriage courses, one for each couple type.
Oh my.
And in order to do that, it was a lot of video, a lot of content. And so we had a number of people helping us with it.
Yeah.
Beth and I would create the content, and well, it was very common that as you're initially looking at these two types together, for each of our team members to think, oh no, this cannot be good. And then Beth and I would talk to him like, well, this couple type. It's that couple that you know from church. They're like, oh, they're great. And here's the thing is that um, there's no two types that are the worst and can't change.
Hmm,
But two types that are healthy make a great relationship.
that's cool.
And so it's not so much about their type, it's much more about their alignment with the truth of the gospel.
Hmm,
Because we types that you would think, now it is true, there are some trends of different couple types that we typically are attracted to people who can help us with our own weaknesses.
right.
And so you'll find like a lot of type 5s marry type 2s,
Hmm,
or type 9s marry assertive types that kind of get them going.
mhm.
Um, and so there are trends, but the reality is two people who are aligned with the truth of the gospel can make a great relationship.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Very cool. Well, Jeff, I only have you for a limited time, and I'm really grateful that you spent some time with me today and sharing with us. We're
Sure.
going to link off to everything that he's mentioned down below, and yeah, seriously, go buy 3 or 4 of everything that they're selling, because it's just that good. But before we wrap up, I mean, what encouragement do you have for pastors, whether it's Enneagram related or not? I mean, you've done this. You've been in the local church for years. You understand the weight and the burden of pastoring. You know, what encouragement, based on where we are at this time in the world, you know, what encouragement do you have for pastors right now?
Yeah, man, so many things come to mind, but I'll speak more personally and hope that it has application to other people.
Mm,
Whenever I went through my first real difficult transition with the church, I immediately chose to be part of a community that was going to help me with some patterns of how I lived out my sense of calling and my
mm,
relationships that was unhealthy.
mm,
And in light of doing that, although it wasn't focused on my marriage or my parenting,
mhm,
eventually my wife and kids were like, "Hey, are you going to your meeting this week?" And because they knew that the more I took care of myself,
mm,
the better I was able to love them.
yeah.
And so, I've a pastor that I was under. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Siri picked up my voice for some reason and started answering the question. How fun is that? Who knows? Get out of here, Siri. Um, but I remember a pastor, veteran pastor, been in the same congregation for 30 years, and he had this quote. I don't know who said it, but it was, "My greatest gift to the congregation is my holiness."
Mm,
And your capacity to care for yourself is the greatest gift that you can give your congregation.
wow.
And it it doesn't feel like it's that way because we're attuned to wanting to take care of everybody else,
Yeah.
but that comes to our own diminishment.
Mm,
And as Jesus said in Mark 10, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And yes, we are to model Christ in being a servant, but we must first allow him to wash our feet so that we can be the best for those around us.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Jeff, thank you for that. Thank you for
Yeah.
the time today, and thanks again for all that you're doing for the church, and for people outside the church that you're working with. Greatly appreciate your ministry.
Well, thanks for having me, Matt. And know that we carry the local church in our hearts and we care about it very deeply. And we're praying for our pastors and leaders in our community all the time. So thanks so much for giving me an opportunity to share with them.
My pleasure.